Daniel always reached the school gate before the sky even thought about changing colors. The streetlights would still be glowing with that soft orange haze, and the world would feel frozen, as if holding its breath while waiting for the day to begin. He would sit on the cold bench outside the gate, hands tucked into his sleeves, staring at the quiet road with a stillness most children his age never had. He looked like he was guarding something fragile, something he didn't dare let slip away. Most days, Miss Carter arrived early, but somehow Daniel always beat her there. She would step out of her car, see the small figure curled into his jacket, and feel that same tug in her chest. One morning, she approached him with a gentle smile and said, "Daniel, you're here even earlier than me again." He gave a soft laugh, barely lifting his eyes. "I just like starting the day ahead," he said. She noticed frost on his sleeves and frowned. "It's freezing today. You must have left the house pretty early." Daniel shrugged. "It's not that cold once you move." Miss Carter wanted to ask more, but she didn't want to push him. Still, something didn't sit right with her. During class, she watched the way he focused so hard on every lesson, always neat, always quiet, always trying. Most children drifted off, whispered, passed notes, but Daniel moved like someone carrying invisible weight. When she asked the class a question, he answered with calm certainty, yet he never spoke more than necessary. It was as if he lived behind a thin wall that no one else could see dot at recess. She stood at the window and watched him eat alone at the edge of the yard. He didn't seem lonely more, like he had taught himself to be content with silence. When another boy asked him to join a game, Daniel smiled politely and said, "Maybe next time." Then he returned to his small circle of quiet after school. She noticed how quickly he packed, how he kept glancing at the clock as though something waited for him. "Heading home right away?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, I've got things to do." "What kind of things?" she asked lightly. He hesitated. "Just stuff." She wanted to believe him, but the answer felt too empty, too rehearsed. As he walked out, she caught sight of the bottom of his shoe. The sole was peeling away, and when he stepped, the flap bent back like a tired mouth. The next morning was colder. A thin layer of frost coated the ground, and Miss Carter pulled her coat tighter as she walked to the gate. Daniel was already there, sitting just as still as always, his breath turning into pale mist in the air. She approached him and said, "Daniel, you must be waking up before the sun." He smiled faintly. "I guess I like the quiet." "Quiet is nice," she agreed, "but sleep is important too. You don't have to come this early every day." Daniel looked down at his hands. "It's okay. I don't mind." There was something in his voice, soft, almost practiced, that made her wonder what he wasn't saying. She decided to let it rest, but the feeling followed her like a shadow. During a writing assignment later that day, she walked past his desk and noticed the way he held his pencil. His knuckles were red and rough, as though he had spent a long time in the cold. She paused beside him and asked softly, "Are you warm enough today?" Daniel nodded, but he didn't look up. "Yeah, I'm used to it." She moved on, but her heart felt heavy. Something about that answer didn't feel right. When dismissal came, Daniel was already halfway down the hall before she finished saying goodbye to the class. She stepped into the corridor just in time to see him turning the corner. Walking fast, almost like he was racing the fading afternoon light. That night, she sat on her couch, staring at her lesson plans but reading none of them. She kept thinking about the frost on his jacket, the worn-out shoes, the quiet he carried around him like a shield. She wondered if maybe he lived far, or if maybe his parents worked early, or if there was something else entirely, something he didn't want anyone to see. The next morning, the storm arrived. Rain hammered the ground in heavy sheets, and the sky looked bruised and tired. Miss Carter drove carefully, knowing she'd be the first one there. But when she pulled up to the gate, her breath caught. Daniel was already there. He sat under the small overhang, his clothes damp around the edges, hair dripping down his forehead. He stood when he saw her, offering a smile that tried to look bright but couldn't hide the exhaustion in his eyes. "You walked here in the storm?" She asked softly. "It wasn't that bad," he said. "I just got caught in the heavy part near the end." "Daniel," she said gently, "why are you always here so early?" He blinked. "I just like being early. It makes the day feel easier." "That's not a real answer," she whispered. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he said, "It's fine, really." But she heard the tremble behind his words. The kind of tremble someone learns when they're used to hiding the truth. Throughout the day, she kept watching him, how he pressed his hands against the radiator for warmth, how he kept rubbing his sleeves to dry them, how he fought sleep during a quiet reading moment but tried to hide it each time she looked his way. After school, she tried once more. "Daniel, if there's something going on at home, you can tell me." His eyes widened with a flicker of fear. "There's nothing wrong. I promise." But it didn't feel like a promise. It felt like a plea. As he hurried out into the wet afternoon, Miss Carter stood by the window, watching the small figure disappear into the storm. Something inside her tightened with worry, and she knew she could no longer ignore the feeling that something was deeply, painfully wrong. She didn't know it yet, but a single choice she would make soon, one driven by instinct and concern, would uncover the truth Daniel had tried so hard to hide. Daniel left the school building with the same practice speed he used every day. Shoulders tight, steps quick, eyes forward. Miss Carter followed at a distance, moving with controlled purpose. She kept her pace steady, letting him stay far enough ahead that he wouldn't sense her. She wasn't acting on curiosity. She was responding to a pattern that no longer aligned with any reasonable explanation. Daniel crossed the main road and slipped into a narrow street behind the grocery store. He didn't look around. He walked as if he knew exactly which cracks in the sidewalk to avoid. Miss Carter followed, keeping her footsteps quiet. Daniel turned again, moving deeper into the older part of town, where the houses thinned out and the streetlights stood. Farther apart, he slowed near the edge of a vacant lot. "Not today," he muttered to himself, barely audible. Then he kept walking. Miss Carter tracked the words. He wasn't speaking casually. He was measuring something, calculating a route he had repeated dozens of times. A block later, he paused at a corner. He looked left, then right, then whispered, "Almost there." Miss Carter stayed behind a leaning fence, watching him adjust his backpack strap with a familiar tight motion. He continued down a dirt path lined with broken boards and rusted metal scraps. The world grew quieter the farther he walked, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and old wood. Daniel reached a rundown building made of warped metal sheets and cracked plywood. The roof sagged in the middle. A rusted padlock hung on the door. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. He looked around once. "Okay," he said under his breath. "No one here." He unlocked the door and slipped inside. Miss Carter stayed still. The shed wasn't a home. It wasn't even a safe structure. The truth settled with controlled clarity. Daniel didn't live in a house, didn't return to warmth or stability. He was sheltering inside a structure that wouldn't survive a strong wind. She waited exactly 3 minutes before stepping closer. She didn't touch the door. She didn't call his name. She needed data, not emotional reaction. She examined the exterior. No footprints besides Daniel's. No sign of adults. A thin cloth shoved into a crack near the bottom. A plastic bottle near the side. A dented tin cup on the ground. Everything indicated solitary survival. She returned to her car using the same route she followed earlier, maintaining the distance that ensured Daniel never detected her. The next morning, she arrived at school before him for the first time. She stood at the gate, arms crossed, waiting. Daniel walked toward her with forced casualness. He was surprised to see her there, but tried to hide it. "You're early," he said. "So are you," she answered. He looked down. "I like starting fresh." Miss Carter evaluated his posture, his breathing pattern, the slight tremor in his fingers. Indicators of fatigue layered with restraint. He sat on the bench. "I didn't sleep well," he said, hoping the partial truth would distract from the rest. Miss Carter sat beside him. "You left school yesterday quickly?" "Yeah, I just needed to get home." She corrected the statement internally. He needed to get back to the shed. "You walked a long route," she said. "Longer than necessary." Daniel stiffened. "I don't like crowds." "That area isn't crowded," she said. He paused. "I just like it better." She didn't push further. Pressure creates retreat. Observation creates openings. During class, Daniel worked with mechanical precision. He wrote quickly, erased carefully, adjusted every line twice. His mind was full but not focused. He made small mistakes he'd never made before. He caught them immediately, but Miss Carter cataloged each one. At lunch, he ate alone again. A teacher from another grade walked past and said, "He's a quiet one." Miss Carter responded with controlled neutrality. "He carries more than he shows." After school, she asked him to stay behind for a moment. He froze, then tried to appear relaxed. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," she said. "I wanted to check on you. I'm fine." His tone was immediate, automatic. A pre-built defense. "You come early every day," she said, "and you leave fast. I want to understand why." Daniel's voice tightened. "It's just how I like it." "You're lying," she said without softness. He flinched. Silence stretched between them. He released a slow breath. "I don't want to talk about home." She corrected the framing. "You don't want to talk about where you stay." Daniel's throat moved as he swallowed. "It's temporary." "How long?" "Long enough." He stood, gripping the strap of his backpack. "Can I go now?" "You can." She didn't stop him. She didn't lecture. Emotional pressure would produce retreat, not revelation. Daniel left the room with fast steps. Miss Carter watched him disappear down the hall. His shoulders curled inward as if bracing against something more than cold. That night, Miss Carter wrote down the facts. No adult presence observed. No residential entry point. Improvised shelter. Early arrival pattern consistent with a child avoiding an unstable environment. Behavioral indicators, hypervigilance, strategic avoidance, practice deflection. Evidence of survival mode. She closed her notebook and sat still. She wasn't dealing with defiance or secrecy. She was dealing with a child who had constructed an entire routine to remain invisible. The next morning, Daniel arrived at his usual time. Miss Carter walked toward him with measured steps. Daniel tried to smile, but the expression wavered. "You seem tired," she said. "I'm okay. You're exhausted." He looked away. "It's just the weather." "It's not the weather," she said. His hands tightened around his backpack straps. "Please don't make this a big thing. You're living alone." His breath caught. He didn't answer, she continued. "I followed you yesterday." Daniel's head snapped up, eyes wide with fear. "You can't, you shouldn't. Why did you?" "You're not safe," she said. He backed up a step. "I told you I'm fine. You're not." He closed his eyes hard. "If people find out, everything gets worse. What you're doing is already worse." He shook his head. "I can handle it. You're a child living in a shed." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His face tightened, jaw trembling. He inhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. "I didn't want anyone to know," he said quietly. "I know," she answered. "And now that I do, I won't ignore it." Daniel's breathing faltered. "Please don't take me away. You will not be abandoned." He looked at her with raw disbelief. "People always say that. People aren't me." Daniel's defenses cracked. His eyes filled, but he didn't look away this time. He let the truth settle, heavy but real. The shed wasn't a home. His silence wasn't choice. His routines weren't habits. They were survival. Daniel sat at his desk that morning with his shoulders drawn in, as if he expected the walls to close around him. The usual buzz of the classroom rose and fell around him, but he heard very little of it. His mind kept returning to the words from the gate, the ones that could not be taken back. Miss Carter knew. The shed wasn't invisible anymore. The life he had built in the shadows now had a witness, and that changed everything. Open your notebooks. Miss Carter said. Her voice was steady, without the softness she sometimes used. Daniel flipped his notebook open, but his hand shook slightly. She walked between the rows, glancing at each student's page. When she reached him, she paused for half a second longer than usual. Focus on the task, she said quietly. I'm trying, he answered. Try harder, she replied. He understood. She wasn't dismissing his fear. She was refusing to let it swallow the rest of him. The assignment was simple, but his thoughts weren't. Write about a place that feels safe. The words on the page blurred. His pencil hovered over the lines. For a long time, he wrote nothing. Then Miss Carter's voice cut through the noise in his head. Start with one sentence, she said. He nodded, even though his chest felt tight. Finally, he wrote, a safe place is a door that can lock and a bed that belongs to you. His own words surprised him. He stared at the sentence, unsure whether to erase it. He left it. He kept writing, each sentence pulling something out of him he had never put into words. At the end of class, Miss Carter collected the notebooks. Her expression gave nothing away. When the bell rang, the students rushed out. Daniel packed slowly, the strap of his backpack digging into his hand. Stay for a minute, Miss Carter said. He froze, then turned toward her. She placed his notebook on the desk between them. You wrote about safety. He kept his eyes on the floor. It was just the assignment. It was more than that, she said. He swallowed. You're going to call someone? Yes, she answered. I will. He tensed. They're going to put me somewhere I don't know. With people I don't know. I'll lose what little I have. You don't have enough to lose, she said. Tears burned at the back of his eyes, but he forced them down. You don't understand. She ignored the statement. How long have you been in that shed? He hesitated. A while. How long? Months, he said. Since my dad left. The word hung between them. Left. Not died, not taken, not lost. Left. He walked out? She asked. He said he'd be back, Daniel said. He never came back, and before that. My mom left earlier, Daniel said. She said she couldn't stay anymore. They fought a lot. She cried. He shouted. Then she stopped crying and just left. You stayed, Miss Carter said. Someone had to, he answered. Someone had to do what? Make sure there was still a place with my stuff in it, even if it's not much. She watched his face. No one checked on you. I learned how not to be noticed, he said. If no one sees you, no one asks questions. If no one asks questions, you don't have to lie. You shouldn't have to lie at all, she said. That's not how it works, he replied. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a small stack of forms. I'm reporting this. It's not optional. You're not staying in that shed another night. He stepped back. You can't decide that. I can, she said, and I will. He shook his head. You're going to turn my life into a file. People will read it and talk about me like I'm a problem that needs a plan. You're a child who needs a place to sleep, she said. That's the only file that matters. He stared at her, breathing unevenly. What if the new place is worse? It is already worse, she said. He dropped his gaze to the notebook. I hate that, you know. I don't care that you hate it, she answered. I care that you survive it. He fell silent. The fight in him wasn't gone, but it shifted. He no longer argued about the shed itself. He argued against the unknown. Will they split me from school? He said. School stays, she said. I will make sure of that. You can't promise. I don't promise, she said. I act. She picked up the phone. Daniel watched every movement like each one was a step away from the life he understood, no matter how broken it was. She spoke clearly, giving facts, not opinions. Student, no guardian. Unstable shelter. Immediate risk. She hung up. They're coming this afternoon, she said. You'll stay here until then? He clenched his jaw. So that's it. That's the beginning, she said. He sat back down slowly, as if the chair had become unfamiliar. Minutes stretched into slow, heavy blocks of time. Outside, the sounds of the school day continued, but the world inside the classroom shrank to the space between the two of them. Eventually, Daniel spoke again. I kept thinking if I just stayed quiet, if I just did well in school, if I just handled it, no one would need to know. That strategy kept you alive, she said. It will not build you a life. He nodded once, a sharp movement. I don't know how to need anyone. You already do, she said. You just hate admitting it. He didn't argue. He was too tired, too drained inside. The knock on the classroom door came later, firm and controlled. Daniel's stomach twisted at the sound. The system he had spent months constructing had reached its limit. The invisible life was over. A different one, unwanted but necessary, was about to begin. Daniel followed the caseworker down the hallway with a stiff, measured gait. Miss Carter walked several steps behind them, not speaking, not intruding. She maintained presence without crossing into ownership. Daniel's backpack looked smaller than ever on his shoulders, the fabric thinning, the zipper struggling to stay closed. He kept one hand pressed against it as if it were the last stable. Object in his world. The caseworker led him to a quiet office with 2 chairs and a table. Sit, she said. Daniel sat without protest. He didn't fight anymore. The resistance had drained out of him, replaced by a cold, exhausted clarity. He watched her flip through papers, forms, reports, legal descriptions of his life distilled into lines and signatures. Miss Carter stood by the door. She didn't sit. She observed. The caseworker spoke first. You won't be returning to the shed. Daniel gave a short nod. I figured. You'll be placed with a foster family temporarily. He stared at the table. How temporary? Depends on the evaluation. He drew a breath through clenched teeth. So nothing is stable. Stability is the point of intervention, she said. Daniel didn't react. He was past phrases meant to reassure, she continued. The home you're going to has space, supervision, and consistent structure. You'll have a bed, regular meals, and adults responsible for you. He traced a line in the wood with his finger. I don't know them. That's normal. He kept tracing. Normal is not useful. The caseworker paused, but didn't soften her tone. Your survival model won't function anymore. You'll adapt to a different one. Daniel finally looked up. What if I fail at that too? Miss Carter stepped forward. You won't? Miss Carter stood by the door. She didn't sit. She observed. The caseworker spoke first. You won't be returning to the shed. Daniel gave a short nod. I figured. You'll be placed with a foster family temporarily. He stared at the table. How temporary? Depends on the evaluation. He drew a breath through clenched teeth. So nothing is stable. Stability is the point of intervention, she said. Daniel didn't react. He was past phrases meant to reassure, she continued. The home you're going to has space, supervision, and consistent structure. You'll have a bed, regular meals, and adults responsible for you. He traced the line in the wood with his finger. I don't know them. That's normal. He kept tracing. Normal is not useful. The caseworker paused, but didn't soften her tone. Your survival model won't function anymore. You'll adapt to a different one. Daniel finally looked up. What if I fail at that too? Miss Carter stepped forward. You won't. He held her gaze for a second, then returned to staring at the table. The caseworker gathered the papers. Pack your belongings now. I already have them. She looked at his small backpack. That's everything? That's everything, he said. They escorted him outside. The air was cool and sharp. Daniel walked toward the car without looking back at the school. He opened the door and sat in the back seat. Miss Carter stood at the curb, watching him. He didn't wave. She didn't expect him to. When the car drove off, Daniel kept his eyes on the window, watching the buildings slide by like blurred shapes. The town looked different from inside the system than it did when he walked its streets alone. He saw details he never noticed before: lit windows, orderly fences, porches with shoes left out to dry. He realized how many homes existed around him and how none of them had been his. The foster home sat at the end of a quiet street. A modest one-story house, blue paint slightly faded, a patch of garden near the porch. The caseworker led him inside. A woman in her late 40s stood waiting, arms folded, posture steady. This is Mrs. Rowan, the caseworker said. She be responsible for your care? Mrs. Rowan nodded once. Room is ready. Rules are clear. Dinner at 6. Lights out at 9. School attendance mandatory. Daniel didn't respond. Follow, she said, and walked down the hallway. He followed. The room was small but clean. A bed with a plain blanket. A desk by the window. A dresser with empty drawers. He placed his backpack on the bed. Mrs. Rowan watched him. Unpack. He hesitated. There isn't much. Doesn't matter. Unpack. He opened the zipper and took out the items. 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, a small towel, a book with bent edges. He placed them in the drawers. The backpack collapsed flat. Mrs. Rowan inspected the result. Good enough. Meal an hour. She left the room. Daniel sat on the bed. The silence was unfamiliar. Not the empty silence of the shed. A structured silence built by walls that didn't shift. He lay back and stared at the ceiling. His throat tightened. He didn't cry. He didn't break. He simply existed, caught in the space between what he had been and what he was expected to become. At dinner, he ate slowly. Mrs. Rowan observed without comment. Another foster child, younger, sat across from him, chewing fast. No one spoke. Afterward, Daniel returned to his room. The bed felt stable. The blanket felt warm. He wasn't used to either. He turned off the light at 9, as instructed. The next morning, he woke earlier than necessary. Habit. He dressed and sat at the desk until it was time to leave. Mrs. Rowan drove him to school. No conversation exchanged. When he stepped onto the school grounds, he paused. The gate looked different now. It no longer represented the beginning of his day-long strategy for survival. It represented something else: routine embedded in support, not secrecy. Miss Carter stood near the building entrance. She looked at him, assessing without pity. You made it, she said. Yeah. First night? Quiet, that's expected. He adjusted his backpack. It feels strange. Strange is transitional, she said. He looked at the ground. I didn't think yesterday would happen. It needed to, she said. I know. She studied his posture. Less tension, less collapse. A middle point between exhaustion and endurance. He finally met her eyes. Thank you. Miss Carter didn't soften. You needed intervention. You have it. He nodded once. I'll keep coming early. You don't have to. I know, he said. But I want to. She accepted that answer, not because she believed it was about preference, because she understood it was about reclaiming one part of his life that still felt like his. Throughout the day, Daniel worked with steadier focus. His writing was cleaner, his responses sharper. The emotional weight hadn't vanished, but the crushing survival pressure had loosened. At lunch, a classmate asked if he wanted to sit with them. Daniel paused, then said, "Maybe." The boy shrugged. "Whatever works." Daniel sat alone again, but the seat beside him didn't feel permanently empty. After school, Miss Carter approached him outside. "Transition will take time," she said. "I know. You'll resist sometimes. I already feel it. You'll keep going anyway." He nodded. "I'm trying." "You're functioning," she said. "Trying is irrelevant." He absorbed that distinction. It mattered. A week passed. Daniel adjusted without collapse. He ate consistent meals. He slept in a real bed. He woke without the cold aching in his bones. He arrived at school early because he chose to, not because he lacked shelter. Slowly, the edges of his world expanded. One morning, as he stood by the gate, he looked up at the sky. The sun was rising, a thin line of gold stretching across the horizon. The air felt different, not lighter, not easier, but possible. Miss Carter walked toward him. "You're early again." He nodded. "This time, it's not because I have nowhere else to be." "Good," she said. He looked at the school building, then back at her. "Everything is still strange. It will stay strange until it becomes normal." He accepted that. He stepped through the gate. Moving forward without needing to hide, Daniel's life shifted from silent endurance to structured stability. Not through dramatic rescue, but through steady, consistent presence. The shed no longer defined his nights. The fear of being unseen no longer shaped his mornings. His routines didn't vanish, they evolved. Waking early became choice instead of necessity. School became grounding instead of escape. Safety became something he learned to accept instead of something he tried to imitate. The transition didn't smooth out overnight. He carried the weight of old habits, the instinct to shrink, the impulse to disappear. But each day, the world around him widened a fraction more. Miss Carter continued to observe without controlling, guide without rescuing, stand near without overshadowing. Daniel moved through his days with a stronger spine, a clearer gaze, and a slow, quiet understanding that he no longer survived alone. His story closed where it began, at the school gate. Only now, he stood there not as the boy hiding truth behind discipline, but as the boy rebuilding a life piece by piece. His past didn't vanish. It simply stopped being the only story he had. For those listening or reading, Daniel's journey reflects a simple truth. One person paying attention can alter the entire trajectory of a life. Engagement matters. Awareness matters. Stories matter. If work like this resonates, keep following it, share it, talk about it. Help it reach someone who may need it more than they admit. If you felt this story, stay with us, subscribe for more powerful stories that touch the heart and remind us what truly matters.